Hi, this is Ned Siegfried from Siegfried & Jensen. As proud sponsors of BeliefCast, we hope you are inspired by Todd's weekly podcasts, which contain so many courageous stories of recovery and personal growth. Remember, it's not what happened in the past that matters, it's what happens in the future. We invite you all to work hard and be optimistic about your future. Enjoy today's podcast.
Welcome back. Thanks for joining us once again. This is Todd Sylvester with the Todd Sylvester Inspires BeliefCast. Thank you for tuning in week after week. It means so much to me, and I love you guys for it. I want to thank our sponsor, Veracity Networks. Thank you for believing in me and helping get the word out of this podcast, because the guests that have been on have been fantastic. And today's going to be no different. Today we're joined by Jeffery Olsen. Jeff, thanks for joining us.
It's so good to be with you, Todd. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Thank you. Well, a little background on Jeff. He's a best-selling author who inspires audiences internationally with his intriguing story, which I can't wait to get into. You've persevered through some really difficult things, and you were in a horrific automobile accident that took the lives of your wife and your youngest son. It also inflicted some life-threatening injuries to yourself, including the amputation of your left leg. But you have found the courage to survive over 18 surgeries, and eventually, you've healed both physically and emotionally. But more importantly, you're giving back now, which I love. You've written, I think, is it 3 books now?
Yeah. Yep. 3 books.
3 books. The latest is called Knowing. Is that correct?
Yeah. Knowing is the book. It's a compilation of the first 2. So
gotcha.
It really is the definitive
Okay.
story right up until just recently. So
Beautiful. Well, you had a near-death experience, and the NDE, they call it sometimes, you're right, and near-death experiences. And I've always been fascinated by those because I don't know how to say this other than what I'm going to say. This is how I really feel. I'm excited to know what's next, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm that, and you have had an experience, and we get to hear this today, and I'm so excited for the listeners. But not just that, though, Jeff, just how you live your life now, and that you're giving back and making a difference in people's lives. And you've said some really powerful things that I've studied up on. And one thing that really stood out to me is that you said that you've learned the meaning of being still.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to know more about that, among a bunch of other things. So again, thanks for joining us.
No, it's an honor.
So why don't we just start with a little background? Tell us kind of where you grew up and a little bit about your family.
Yeah. No, I grew up in Charleston, Utah.
Okay.
Little teeny town, but my mother and father had divorced when I was young. I was born in Provo.
Okay.
And Mom and Dad split up, and Mom took us, and us being me and my 2 brothers, 3 boys,
Okay.
to Salt Lake City. And, my father had a ranch and a dairy farm in Wasatch County. And although my parents split up, they were great co-parents,
Right.
Gosh, Dad would drive from Heber City to Salt Lake to watch a Little League baseball game. In fact, I think every Little League baseball game.
Yeah, wow.
And, and that perpetuated. My brothers and I became very, very close, because Mom went to work, and of course, Dad, we'd only see him on the weekends, and me and my brothers were inseparable. My big brother was my coach, my mentor,
really?
my everything. My younger brother was my best buddy.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so it was pretty rough and tumble, and we'd spend every weekend with my dad on the farm, so cows and horses and cowboy stuff. And eventually we moved in with my father full time as adolescent teenagers. My mom just felt, you know what?
Yeah.
you get to go.
It's time to go up there,
with Dad. So I basically grew up, in those formative years in Wasatch County on a dairy farm with a cattle ranch and horses. Went to Wasatch High School, did all kinds of athletics. I was a wrestler. I was a football player. I even ran track, but
Really? Okay.
But my father was always like, no, I need you home on the farm, pick one sport and go with it. And I eventually, I went to Utah State University and earned a football scholarship. I walked on, but they kept me. And
right on.
And that's when I fell madly in love with Tamara. Gosh, went on and started a family, and things rolled on. But that's a bit of my background. I'm a normal guy from a pretty normal, however rough and tumble background. All guys on a cattle ranch and a dairy farm. It was a great way to grow up.
Yeah, I'm sure being on that dairy farm, you had to learn how to work hard.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's not easy work.
No, I mean, we were up every morning at 4 a.m., and my father, not only was he, running the farms, but he was in the military. So he was a soldier, he was a cowboy. He would go off on active duty at times, and it was us three boys running the whole operation with hired hands. And I remember at times, I may have been 14, and my father would say, "You're in charge. Take these three guys." So I'm 14, in charge of three grown men to go down and fix fence or round up these cows or whatever. Yeah. And it was hard work, but it was a good life.
For sure. I had an experience baling hay once for a day, and I could not believe how hard that was. We were back in the way they did it the old way, and we were just throwing bales of hay, and the bale of hay weighed more than I did at the time. And but I just remember, man, this is tough work.
I did a lot of that. It kept us in shape, that was for sure.
Yeah, wow. Well, so like you said, you fell madly in love with Tamara and started a family, and things were going well, just again, and maybe just kind of lead us up to kind of the experience in the accident. And
that's perfect. There. I mean, and I'll share some detail, but the day I met Tamara was profound. I mean, I was actually shy, and here this young woman walks in, and she was gorgeous and attractive, and but it was like lightning hit me. It was like something you said, there she is, that's the one. And
wow.
That was kind of frightening, and probably the biggest miracle is that I spoke to her and introduced myself, and we had a conversation, and we became friends, which turned into a relationship, which turned into a courtship.
Yeah.
And I actually left the country for 2 years during that relationship. I was in Scotland. I was doing I was on a proselyting mission.
Okay.
And she waited for me and wrote me every week. And when we,
which doesn't happen too often, right?
No, you don't leave. Young people don't separate for 2 years and have it work out. But somehow we fell deeper in love. And when I returned, we married soon after, and we were married for about 3 years when Spencer, our first son, came.
Okay.
And that was such a joy. He's still one of my best buddies. And then there was complications. So there was, it was an issue getting pregnant a second time. And yet 6 years after that, Griffin came. And he was our miracle boy. We were told we may never have any more children. And yet here was Griffin. And so it was my wife and I and two, strong, healthy boys and young boys. Right. Griffin was just a toddler, just learning to walk. Spencer was 7 years old at the time of this accident that was actually the day after Easter. So this is a very tender time of year for me.
For sure, yeah.
You don't get over grief, and everyone should realize it'll be 24 years since the accident come Easter this year.
Yeah, that's gonna be one of my. I didn't know how long it had been,
and so I couldn't even speak of these things for almost a decade. I'd just cry, and yet there was a lot of processing and things. So I speak from a place where, I'm 2 decades out in front of it, and I can look at it with clarity, But what happened that Monday morning after Easter, we'd been on a little family road trip, and we were coming back, driving from southern Utah back to Davis County where we lived. Mm-hmm. And I lost control of the car. I was driving. Tamara had laid her seat back and was sound asleep. Griffin, my toddler, was sound asleep. In fact, not long before the accident, I looked in the rearview mirror just to check on traffic and noticed him and saw how beautiful. I mean, it was this moment of profound gratitude, actually. I peeked in the rearview mirror. It's a moment. And I see Griffin, my toddler, sleeping in his car seat and thinking, wow, what a miracle. And I heard Spencer, my 7-year-old, playing behind me, making all the joyful noise of a little boy.
Of a boy, yeah.
And I glanced at Tamara, who had also reclined her seat back and was sound asleep. But I thought, she's still holding my hand. And she was. I mean, we're 10 years into a marriage, 2 kids later.
It's amazing.
And I'm thinking, what a miracle. She's still holding my hand. And yet it was not long after that I lost control of the car. And I may have dozed off for a moment, but I swerved. To the right. And I shouldn't pass that so quickly. I mean, there was so much, gosh, did I doze off at the wheel? There was so much guilt and trauma because I swerved to the right. overcorrected to the left, and the car began to roll. I had the cruise control at 75 miles an hour, so high speed.
Yeah.
And there was a horrific accident that resulted in the death. Actually, they were killed instantly, Tamara and Griffin, at the scene, and I was aware of that at the scene.
You knew that they were gone.
I knew they were gone, and that's the darkest. I mean, that's the darkest place a man could be. Now, I blacked out for most of the crash, but when I thought, oh my gosh, what happened?
Yeah.
The first thing I heard was Spencer, my 7-year-old, crying.
Yeah.
But it was that cry a father knows, wow, he's okay. I got to get to my boy. I've got to get to my boy. And that's when I realized I could not move. I was pinned. I couldn't tell whether to the floorboard or the seat. There was the broken glass, the smell of gasoline. But I also realized in that moment that, wow, no one else is crying. And, that was overwhelming. And I knew in that moment that they were gone. I was unaware of my injuries, actually. I knew I was in pain. I knew I was struggling to breathe. What had happened was both my legs were crushed and shattered. The left leg was not long after amputated above the knee. My back had been damaged. My rib cage had been damaged. My lungs were collapsing. My right arm had almost been torn off, and then the seatbelt had cut through and ruptured all my intestines.
Wow.
But the physical injuries were nothing compared to the emotional injury of, oh no, I mean, can't I have those 3 seconds back? What just happened?
What just happened? Yeah.
Oh
my goodness.
So, in that dark moment, and I don't share all that to be graphic or morbid, but as I was attempting to comfort Spencer, my 7-year-old, who was crying hysterically, and I couldn't get to him, suddenly this light came. I mean, and I don't know how else to put it. It felt as if light came and surrounded me. And I knew I was struggling to breathe and struggling to maintain consciousness. Yeah. But when the light came, it felt as if I was delivered, like I was lifted up above the car or above the scene of the accident, like I was delivered out of it. And suddenly there was no pain. I could breathe. I was fine. And that was the question, is how can I possibly be okay? How can I, it's like the light was comforting me almost in this morbid, horrible, horrific thing. And as I was, processing how can I possibly be okay, what just happened, Tamara, my wife, who I knew was deceased at the scene, suddenly she was there with me in the light. And and she was gorgeous. She was radiant. I mean, it wasn't like the scene of the accident. She was beautiful. Right. And she was communicating to me, Jeff, you got to go back. You got to go back. You can't come. You can't be here.
Okay.
And we had this incredible conversation that was far more intense than just words. I mean, it's almost like mind melding, but she was speaking to me. She was saying, no, you've got to go. And we were discussing this whole issue of, if I stayed with her, Spencer would be orphaned. Yeah. And I learned a lot about choice in this moment, because there I was looking at the woman that I loved more than life.
Right.
And yet I knew I had a 7-year-old boy in the backseat of that car, and I made a choice to come back. And
really,
I share that because we have no idea how powerful our thoughts are. Mm-hmm. And I also had a huge, cosmic download of how big choice is. Really? Like, everything's a choice,
Yeah,
and,
right.
And, wow, I said the most profound goodbye I'll ever say. Man.
Had you left the scene, if you don't mind me asking, did, when that light was around and you were there with your wife, not in pain and all that, were you at the scene, or were you somewhere else,
It felt as if I was somewhere else.
Okay.
It felt as if I was delivered from all of that.
Okay.
But I often refer to it as a bubble of light. It's like I was held in this suspended moment, that was free of the scene of the accident, but I wasn't anywhere. I was just with her having this conversation. And I have no concept of time in this bubble of light. Sure. I mean, I later found out that people arrived at the scene of the accident. Ironically, one was a doctor. He was able to see to Spencer and take care of things.
Yeah.
They rushed Spencer to a local hospital. They had to extricate me from the car. Because of my injuries, it was necessary I be airlifted or life flighted to the closest level 1, trauma hospital.
Right.
I had no idea. I knew I had wrecked the car. I knew Tamara and Griffin had passed.
Yeah.
I was speaking to Tamara and saying the most profound goodbye I'll ever say. And as I chose to come back, I found myself wandering through a hospital, this level 1 trauma center in Salt Lake City, and when I say wandering through, just moving about freely, free of pain, still in the trauma of what had happened. But the ironic thing is I was experiencing everyone around me so much differently. I mean,
really,
I was seeing the doctors, the nurses, the patients, even the families of patients in this busy, emergency level 1 trauma center. And yet everyone I saw, I knew them perfectly. It's like I felt them. Like I knew their life. I knew their love, their hate, their joy, their motivations.
Really?
I was experiencing them as if they were me, like I was them and they were me. There was what I now call, there was a oneness. There was a oneness with everything and everyone around me.
Wow. And did you know that you weren't, like, I guess, in your body at this point, or were you just absorbing the experience and just
the experience was so overwhelming that I was still processing, like, okay, what what happened here?
Yeah.
And I was so overwhelmed with this connectedness, this oneness. And I had grown up in a conservative Christian home. A biblical verse came to mind, and it was the famous, "Inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me."
Wow.
And I used to believe that was a nice verse about being nice as I grew up, and yet I was experiencing this connection, this oneness, and I thought, wow, Jesus, this master who said that. Okay, now I'm seeing it at a deeper level. They are me. I am them. He was saying, I am the beggar on the street. I am the man in prison.
Okay.
I am that I am. And I was having this connected feeling to that. Now, as I was experiencing this, I eventually came up to a man, a body laying on the gurney that I didn't feel anything from.
Right.
And that's when the reality hit. Oh my gosh, that's me.
Whoa.
Or that's my body.
Man.
I was having this profound connected experience, but there was my flesh. There was the skin suit that I'd been wandering through life in. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And I've heard this before in other near-death experiences that I've, studied up on, and where they've said similar to where they felt this profound love on a level they have never really felt before. And I love what you said about that connectedness, and I know how powerful it is, like just sitting here with you right now, connecting with you right now. But I know it's, the level you were experiencing that, it had to have been just unbelievable.
It changed me. It changed me. Judgments and comparisons just kind of went out the window.
Really?
And I, before then I'd been a little judgmental. I'd been a lot judgmental. Like, well, they deserve that. No, they're not, doing it right, or what, whatever that looked like. But suddenly I was seeing everyone in this absolute divine perfection. In a way. Yeah.
Well, and you mentioned too, so you see your skin suit, your body laying there, and then did you consciously make a choice to go back into that?
Yeah, and that was interesting. I stood above my body, and that was a profound moment. Only then did I realize, wow, what an incredible machine my body is. I didn't have to tell my eyes how to see, or my lungs how to breathe, or my feet how to walk, and yet it was disturbing and sorrowful, because I thought, what a mess my body is, and I've got to get back in. And again, it was a choice. It was a choice. Okay, I'm going back in, but I didn't have to figure out how to go back in. It was the intention. It was the thought. It was almost as soon as I would choose, boom, there I was. But boy, back in the body, when I made that choice, it was like being in a lead mummy, know, I mean, it was so heavy, and all the grief, all the pain, all the trauma, all the guilt, everything returned.
Really?
And,
So you felt all of those normal emotions anyone would feel in those moments, they came flooding back.
They came crashing down.
Wow.
And I was intubated, I mean, they had a big tube down doing the breathing for my lungs. My legs were obviously immobile. My right arm was immobile, and my left arm was eventually tied down because I kept grabbing at all the...
Trying to pull the stuff.
Yeah, I was trying to pull the intubator out and everything else. And, and yet that's when I learned what it meant to be still, to literally just... I had no choice.
Right. So why is that so profound for you? Because I know that that's something that you talk a lot about, that be still portion. Why is that so, I guess, maybe even important to not just you, to all of us, I guess?
Yeah, I had been a doer. Oh, I was a doer, doer. And
dairy farm worker.
Well, yeah, and if I had, if I had worries or things on my mind, you would, I mean, you could go for a run, you would go for a hike, you would go punch a heavy bag. And I had graduated from college in marketing. I was a creative director at an ad agency, and so there was lots of doing there, gosh, you're on set, or you're with the team, or you're working on these layouts, or you're with the clients. Suddenly, I realized what it was like in some way to tread the wine press alone. And yet I wasn't, my family was incredible. They were there. Tamra, my wife who had passed, she was there. I continued to have profound communication with her.
So it just kind of... Oh my goodness.
I mean, she, and again, by that time I'm on a lot of morphine and everything else, but it was so real. I mean, these visitations, these dreams, these visions, if you will, were so real that became the reality. This realm was the foggy, crazy dream. In fact, there were times I thought, I'm going to wake up and this is all going to be a bad dream. This nightmare is going to be done, but it wasn't. But Tamra would come, and she would. I'll be brief. There was an interesting scenario where she came at one point, and she was communicating to me things that almost seemed trivial. Hey, I want my niece to have that special ring. I want my cousin to have the other one.
Really?
Give my sister-in-laws my party dresses and my fancy. I mean, but she wanted, and this wasn't necessarily trivial, but she wanted this little song that meant a lot to us to be sung at the service, and she wanted to be buried near our home so we'd have a place to come. Particularly Spencer, her little boy, our little boy.
Sure, yeah.
And then she wanted to be buried with Griffin in her arms, and she's communicating this to me. Now, what I didn't know is the family, and bless them, I mean, her family was making arrangements.
Yeah.
Perhaps they should be buried down in the burial plot they had in southern Utah. The doctors at that point were telling the family, Jeff may not make it. We're not sure how this is going to turn out. So they're saying, gosh, are we burying 2 of them or 3 of them? And if that's the case, what about Spencer?
What do we do with Spencer?
What do we do with him? Now, I had no idea of all those conversations, but I knew Tamra's telling me, this is what I want.
Okay.
Now, here's the funny part of the story. I was life flighted to a medical facility that was not in my insurance network. And so the insurance company is saying, we want him transferred to, a different hospital that's in network. And, of course, the doctors were upset. My family was livid.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
The insurance company went out and I was to be transferred, and the ambulance crew showed up and they said, there's no way we're moving this guy. I actually had to be life flighted again with the Air Med crew. I don't know that they put me in an airplane, but the Air Med crew had to come to transport me from LDS Hospital in Salt Lake City to the U of U hospital. It's probably not 1.5 miles, 2 miles away. But anyway, here's the point. To do that, they took out the respirator briefly, and I was able to speak. And so here's the family, and I'm saying, Tamra's been coming. Here's what she wants.
Really? So you immediately went into that.
Yeah. And I'm answering all the questions they've been deliberating over and wondering. And, of course, as soon as I got back, to the University Hospital, they intubated me again. Yeah. But when everybody thought it was falling apart, that they're transferring him, this is catastrophe, it was actually falling into place. because otherwise they wouldn't have taken the respirator out, and I
And
wouldn't
you
have been
wouldn't
able
be able
to
to
speak.
say those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That is amazing.
Yeah.
And so you do get transferred,
Yeah.
right? And then continually having some of those experiences as well, or did it eventually just stop?
Yeah. However, I was so sick and in so much grief, and of course they're amputating the leg, and that was, I didn't realize they were doing that. They'd approached the family.
Oh, so you had no idea.
My mother, my brothers, and it's actually quite beautiful, because at the time I was thinking, this is too much. I want to end it. I was actually begging one of my brothers to bring a gun and hide it in the hospital so that I could do myself in.
Wow.
And, and like I say, believing that was
that, if you don't mind me asking, was that because you were in so much pain physically, or was it like you were missing what you had just experienced with your wife? And
it was both.
Okay.
So much pain physically, but so much pain emotionally.
Yeah.
And there was always that teetering.
Sure.
Yeah, I know Spencer needs me. And yet Spencer is the whole reason. I mean, he's the reason I came back.
Yeah.
He's the reason I held on.
Yeah.
Here was my little boy that I knew I wanted to stay and be there for. But there was those moments when it's like, I can't do this. It's too much. And anyway, my brothers actually both went and signed the release to amputate the leg. So I'm begging them I want to take my life.
Yeah,
and they,
right.
So not one of them would have to shoulder that burden. They both went and signed it. So they said, we'll do this together. But they're saving my life at the time I'm saying I want to end it.
Right.
Incredible men, my brothers are.
Man, that's amazing. So, how long did you end up staying in the hospital? I mean, you talk about here, we said it earlier, 18 surgeries and losing your leg.
Surgeries. I was in the hospital for almost 5 months.
Man.
And then there was, months beyond that I was in a wheelchair and doing rehabilitation and home health and occupational therapy and physical therapy. But I was in the hospital for about 5 months.
Man, how was your emotional health at that point when you're now home, you're in a wheelchair, probably doing rehab, trying to learn to, deal with not having a leg? How are you like mentally and spiritually at that moment, in those moments?
I'm broken, but for two things. And the one may be the most profound thing that happened in this out-of-body near-death experience. I had another profound visitation at the end of my hospital stay. And I think it's probably relevant that my two most profound out-of-body or near-death experiences were at the scene of the accident, before any morphine or narcotics were administered.
Right.
And then the other was at the end of my hospital stay. I was finally out of ICU. I had gone through surgical recovery. I was in the rehabilitation center. And I had laid so long on my back, I'd rubbed all the hair off the back of my head. The back of my head was bald. And
really?
my brothers were teasing me about that. But I went to sleep one night and I felt that light return. And when the light did, I felt the same sensation. I'm rising above the hospital bed. And I thought, oh, this is so familiar. And I was still in such grief. And Griffin, my toddler, he had been his car seat had broken up at the accident and he'd been ejected from the car.
Mm-hmm.
That was haunting me.
Oh my gosh.
And although Tamara had been quite present in my consciousness during the hospital stay, nothing of Griffin. But as that light came and I lifted above the hospital bed, the light dispensed and I was in a beautiful place.
Really?
A beautiful, beautiful place. And I began to run. I could run. I had both legs and both feet. And I was like, oh, and it was so physical. I could feel the ground under my feet. I could feel all the intelligence in my calves and thighs. I was joyfully running and laughing. And, I've heard terms like heaven or, the spirit world, the other side. The only word that comes close to what I was experiencing is I was home. I mean, I was home. It's like, oh, I'm home. I felt so welcome, so loved, and yet I was just there alone.
Yeah.
But I did have the inkling or the knowledge that I wasn't there to stay, and at that same time there was this corridor off to my left, and I knew I'm to go down there. I'm just intuitively, I'm to go this way, and I did. And as I worked my way down the corridor, I came upon, at the end of the corridor, a crib. And Griffin had still been sleeping in a crib. He was only 14 months old.
Yeah, he was so young. Yeah.
So I raced to the crib, and I look in, and there he is. And he's sleeping as peacefully as when I'd looked in the rearview mirror.
Wow.
And I swept him up, and I can't, it was such a physical sensation.
Yeah.
I mean, have you ever picked up a sleeping child?
Yeah, it's
the
it's
heat
amazing.
and the weight.
Yeah.
And I held him, and I snuggled into my boy.
Oh my goodness.
And I thought, he's okay. I could feel him breathing. I could feel his breath on my neck. I could feel, and I'm like, he's okay. I began to weep, thinking I'm holding my little boy. And I had longed just for that he's okay. And I began to weep, and I felt this presence coming up behind me that was so overwhelming. It was so cosmic and so big and so wise and so overwhelming. And I began to be fearful. I mean, the guilt, I was driving the car. The guilt had been this constant current through the whole thing, and I'm thinking, this presence coming upon me is so big. That's God. And I'm in trouble. I mean, I cut this little boy's life short because I wrecked the car.
Really?
He's here because I lost control. I mean, the guilt, and as I felt this presence come closer and closer, and I'm holding my son, and I had the thought, I hope there's some way I can be forgiven. And as I had that thought, these divine arms, and this felt physical too, just wrapped around me. Just held me and my little boy, and wow, there was this instant message of there's nothing to forgive.
Really? Everything's
in perfect order. And then there was this download of just peace and love and beauty. And I suppose what is called the life review. My life flashed before my eyes as I'm being held by this divine being, and I'm seeing my life. And I'm seeing things, and I'm saying, "Oh no, that was a mistake." I didn't.
Right.
And yet there was so much love that the communication was, "That's your judgment of it.
Yeah.
We love you. Do you see what that led to? Do you see how your life is perfect? Do you see how much we love you?" And it was a profound experience because I'm holding my little boy, who to me is perfect, and he's innocent, and he's divine, and he's all of that. And at the same time, this divine creator is holding me, saying, "Yep, that's how much we love you. You are as perfect and as divine and as, beloved as the child you hold."
Yeah.
And it was a very personal experience, but it rippled out into, wow, if that's me, that's everybody. That's all of us, every single one of us. So again, that oneness, that love was multiplied. And again, I learned about choice. It was communicated. I could be angry at God because this happened,
right.
Or I could be angry at myself because I was driving the car. But this beautiful being who I call God said, or there's another choice.
Yeah.
You can exercise your will.
Yeah.
And I was like, my will, thy will be done. Isn't that? That's what I was taught in Sunday school. It's like... And it was communicated to me, and this was profound. Your will is my will. That's how much we love you. What do you want? What can we do for you? How can we? And I was told, you can give your son back. Yes, he's here. He's passed. There's that's a reality. But you can hand him over, so that you don't have to feel like he was taken away. In fact, Tamra too, you can give them to us and exercise your will. And therefore, you get to step into creation with the divine rather than being put upon by what is. And I kissed my little boy, and I gave him back, and then woke up to the hospital bed. Now,
really,
that's the one thing that probably got me through going home. You asked, what was the emotional and the physical?
Yeah, okay.
The physical stuff was horrible. I had a big colostomy bag because of the rupturing of my intestines. My left leg was lopped off above the knee. The right leg was in a big brace. The right arm was in a sling. So I had one operating limb.
Goodness.
And they were
Wow.
attempting to teach me how to get into a wheelchair, which they literally had to lift me in, and I was driving. But that was the physical state. I went home. The emotional state was I was a wreck, and I didn't go to my own home. I had to go stay with my brother and have home health for another month or two, and that went on. But it's such a profound question, Todd. I have to give these long, in-depth answers.
No, this is beautiful. I know this is a sacred moment, and thank you for being willing to share. But your answer, I love this.
Okay,
I appreciate it.
There's so much to your question because, wow, going home. And I'd become incredibly panicked about Spencer, my little 7-year-old. He'd lost everything I lost, right?
Yeah, right.
He had lost his mom, his brother, and in many ways he had lost his father too. And
well, now he's seeing his dad all bandaged up.
I'm this,
right.
invalid,
Yeah.
And he had been to the hospital to see me, but we were going home to my brother's house, and my brothers were awesome. I mean, they had just taken him in like one of their own, and my brothers came to get me. They're lifting me into the car. We're driving home. I'm worrying about Spencer. How's he going to deal with this? How's he going to deal with me? I'm now on his turf. I'm not, we're eventually going to have to go to the grocery store. And what's that,
Yeah, how do I do that?
How do I do that? And as we drive up to the house, I see him looking out the window. He's looking out the window, watching his uncles, my big, strong brothers, lift me out of the car and put me in the wheelchair. And I'm thinking, how's this going to go? How's this going to be? And, I began to kind of navigate my way. My brothers had put a ramp, and they were emphatic that I do it myself. You've got to drive the electric wheelchair. You got to be independent. You do it, brother. We'll watch you.
So
but
they're
you
pushing you.
They're pushing
in
you.
a way that way, right? That's awesome.
which is all love. That's pure
For sure.
man love, right? So anyway, I'm doing that, and Spencer runs out, and he runs toward me, and he runs right past me. And I'm like, I knew this was going to be hard for him, but he can't even accept me like this, And I'm trying to navigate, and as I turned to go up the ramp, I just looked to see where he went. And actually what he had done is he'd run across the street, and he was knocking on all the neighbors' doors. He was saying, come out, my dad made it home.
Really?
He's saying, come see my dad. And so I realized my judgments of myself were not his. He was seeing me as this, he was shouting, he's the toughest man in the world. He made it home,
Right.
And then he did come and throw himself on my lap, which just about killed me because I had all the sutures from the abdominal, and he threw his arms around me. And I share this for a specific reason. I said, hey, I'm going to be this way for a while. And he was a Star Wars nut, still is. I said, they're going to make a Darth Vader leg for me, and they're going to put me back together. But I'm going to, can you deal with this? And he said, Dad, if you were nothing but a puddle of blood, I'd still love you. and I burst into tears,
Yeah.
And yet here I was, and this is why I share this. Here I was in a wheelchair, holding my surviving son, who's sharing his love for me. And in an instant, that was no less divine than being in the other realm, holding my son that had passed in the arms of God.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, heaven's right here. There's nowhere to go. There's nothing to be. There's simply to cherish this love in this moment. And those are the two things that got me through. That's a long answer to what was it like physically or emotionally, but I would hold on to that and hold on to this love of my son, who I had come back to be his dad, even if I was a broken down dad. And that was the state. It was difficult. That was long, tearful. Like I say, it took me a long. I don't want anyone to think that I had this horrible accident and had these profound experiences and then I was okay. It was a horrible accident. Profound things happened, but I grieved as miserably as anyone. And Spencer did too, but he was my strength. It was really interesting to be a dad in a wheelchair, and a 7-year-old boy is my hero.
Wow.
So that was pretty. It was pretty.
I love what
profound.
you just said there, though, too, Jeff. That heaven was here.
Yeah.
You were realizing these moments,
Yeah.
and again, you felt connected to your son. And that goes back to what you said earlier, that when you're walking in the hospital, walking down, and you could read almost like every person's fears and worries, and you felt so connected. But then in that moment, the connection you had with your son.
It
Spencer.
was right here. Like we're divine beings. There is no beginning and end. We're here. And yeah, those little moments and those little things are the big things. I mean,
right.
That got me through the next, the next decade, if you will, was, wow, he loves me, and maybe I can love myself in spite of all of it.
Yeah. And again, forgive me if I'm asking trivial questions here, but I mean, I try to picture having that experience, and now you're in your wheelchair, right? You, like when you had kissed Griffin, and then you were back in your body again, back in, did you constantly like be thinking about, I can't believe I've had that experience? I mean, was it like one of those, like, I can't believe I had that experience that I just had? Or
it was so real. I mean, I
don't even know how to ask that question.
And nothing's trivial,
Sorry.
Todd. That's not a trivial question. There was times, in fact, another intricate part of the story is my level 1 trauma doc, the attending ER physician where they life flighted me into, when he came into the operating room, and he has shared this himself now. He was very tight-lipped as a clinician,
Yeah.
He experienced Tamara in the operating room as the team worked on me. He saw her. He saw her spirit there, and she communicated with him and shared gratitude for how much they were doing to save my life. Now, I would have never known that, except one of the nurses who also experienced that begged him to come and tell me what had happened. They didn't know me from Adam.
Right, yeah.
But they came and told me what they had experienced, and I hadn't said a word except to my mother and my younger brother about what I had experienced. And so suddenly I had this connection to this doctor, and I thought, well, if his name is Jeff O'Driscoll. He's an incredible guy and has become a dear friend. He's been a friend for over 20 years now.
Yeah.
But because they came and shared that, I felt safe to share with him what I had experienced. Now, he became one of my lifelines because I didn't dare talk to people about this. I mean, I didn't want to.
Well, yeah, you said 10 years. You didn't really share it with anyone unless these close.
Just immediate family and my, the doctor, some of my closest associates. And yet he was interesting because he wasn't a friend or family, but that was neutral ground. I'm like, if I'm nuts, he'll put me in the psych ward and we can. But I what I had experienced, I knew was so real, but I knew others may not feel that way. You don't show up at Sunday school and say, hey, by the way, I was in the arms of God and there's no judgment. He loves us and we're divine. It's
like
what?
For sure.
But I could share these things, and so I did question it at times, and I asked him at one point, "What if I'm making all this up? I mean, what if it was just a dream? What if I was saying it was so real, it was so profound."
Yeah.
But I even questioned that, and he said, "Well, he's a wise man." He said, "If you're divine, and it is your experience, then does it matter?"
Yeah.
And he always left it with a question. It was up to me, but what I experienced was so real. It was so profound, and I don't doubt it for a minute, but I don't expect anyone to believe it. I mean, I have no agenda in sharing it. It's just that this is what happened. And
it's your experience.
But there was times that I would think, wow, could that really be real? Just like you said. But then it was gratitude. It's like, had I not had that experience, had I not been given that gift, had I not had a family that was so close and loving and surrounded me, I might be that guy strung out on the corner. I eventually got it back to work, and I'm working downtown, and I'm thinking I could be him. Yeah. I don't know what happened in his life, but I could be that homeless, strung out, person. And yet I had no judgments of that anymore. It's like, isn't his life beautiful and profound?
Right.
And, but I never doubted that it happened to me. But I questioned often, what are people going to think about this?
Yeah.
And should I even share it with anybody?
Right. For sure. I can imagine that tug of war going on, And see, we just said it took you about 10 years. And obviously you made a decision eventually to go, you know what, I'm going to share this with the world. Yeah. And maybe talk about how you got to that point and and there's I have 1,000 questions right now. So
you can ask it that. This is fantastic. Okay. I love spending time with you. I do.
And thank you.
And I had no intention of sharing this. The way this all came down, Actually, and I was teaching a Sunday school class on a Sunday morning, and I fell apart mentioning the love of God. All of a sudden I'm bawling. I'm talking about the love of God, and a neighbor, a woman in the back, came up and she said, "Something happened to you, didn't it?" And I said, "I don't talk about that." She's like, "I'm coming to see you tonight." Something happened to you.
She's like, I want to hear.
Anyway, and so, she, and this must have been, this must have been 8-9 years after the accident, right?
Yeah.
But it was still so fresh.
Right, yeah.
Anyway, I tell her what happened. She says, "You've got to talk to a friend of mine. He's at the university. He studies what they call a near-death." Yeah. I'm like, no, I'm not talking to anybody about this.
Right,
and she's like, "He's safe. He looks at all the different experiences and how your belief system may influence that."
Yeah.
And so I went and chatted with him. And, of course, I'm sobbing as I share the experience. And he's like, "You've got to come talk to our group." And I'm like, "No, I don't talk about this,
Right.
And he goes, No, Jeff, people are grieving, they're having a hard time.
Yeah.
This may really serve them." And so they had a group that met in Salt Lake, and it was called IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies.
Okay.
And I cried more than I talked, but I finally shared my experience publicly. And ironically, there was somebody in the audience who was a publisher and came up and said, "You're going to write a book." I'm like, "No, I'm not. I'm not doing any of that."
You're like, what?
Yeah, the way it came down is I finally, this scenario was put out. It was a Friday that I spoke. Monday, I had shared my information with this publisher. He had sent a contract to write a book. It was in my email box on Monday morning.
Yeah.
I went back to the scene of the accident.
Wow.
Which I had avoided.
Was this the first time back?
I had been by it,
okay.
and I knew where it was, kind of. But at this point, I called my older brother, who was in law enforcement, and I said, "Hey, I just need to know right where it happened." And he goes, "I don't even have to look it up." He said it was mile marker 80, right outside of Parowan. He said, "I'll never forget it."
Yeah.
That's where it was. So I went back down there. And I asked, I still pray. I'm like, gosh, this publisher am I supposed to write a book,
Yeah.
And the answer came very profound. And I don't profess to talk to God every day, but
right.
the answer came in a profound way that said, I can quote what I was told. When that voice speaks to the heart, it's like I can quote it, like write it down. I was told, "Share your experience and others will heal."
Whoa.
And I'm like, oh.
Ooh, I love that.
So it's not about me. It's about others healing. And by that time, I was 10 years down the road. It's like, okay, it's been a while. I know a little bit about healing, and I know how desperately I wanted to heal. And anyway, so I called the publisher, and we did the book. Now, I figured my mother would buy a copy. Mom.
Your mom will support you.
Well, and I wasn't a writer. I
Right.
mean, I had, anyway,
I love it. That's funny.
I wrote the first book, which was I Knew Their Hearts, and the publisher titled it and did all that.
Right.
But what I didn't realize is, gosh, the book released, and then the first week or so, it was hit the top 10 in the category on Amazon, and all of a sudden this thing's going nuts, and all of a sudden people are saying, "Come talk to us."
Yeah.
And yet I knew it was in greater hands than mine. If it was about me, I'm a blubbering idiot here, even on that, but it wasn't about me.
Sure.
And it's come in a very clear way. I'm crystal clear that, no, that's why I'm here. That's one of the reasons I am still here, not because I have all the answers, not because I'm the guru. I'm not. But I can say, wow, let's walk together down this path.
Right.
Which is a path of love, of oneness, of healing for others. I walked that journey, but there's a lot of people that reach out. I got jail mail from a prisoner in a prison who said, "I read your book."
Really?
And he said, "I lost my family, not like you. They're alive and well. They left me because of what I did, and yet he said, I'm going to come out of here different. I know I'm still loved. I know I'm not what I did, but I'm who I am. I am this divine being.
Yeah.
I've just made some interesting decisions, but I can learn from those and move on. And I just thought, well, that's the guy. That's the one I wrote the book for, because he's healing in a profound way.
I love that.
That works.
Wow. That is amazing. And I love what you said, that impression, share your stories and others will heal.
Yeah, they'll heal.
Right. And I love that because, in my industry that I'm in, the addiction recovery world, that's exactly what we tell them to do. Share your story because you're going to save someone's life.
Yeah.
I mean, because of your words and what you've been through. And I would imagine you've had many people reach out to you and say, hey, thanks for actually, sharing what you did.
Yeah. And it's not all grief and loss. Some of them are saying, hey, gosh, I'm going through a divorce. This little part in your story of how to co-parent, all kinds of interesting things that I've been anxious to meet too. And I don't want to digress, but my youngest son is in recovery.
Okay.
I eventually healed. I remarried. We adopted 2 boys. Life has moved on in a beautiful, profound way. And my current wife, Tanya, she's the hero of the story. For her to step in and take on a one-legged man with a son and become his mother and my wife. And then, she drove the adoption of these 2 boys, which are just my sons. I don't even like to say adopted boys. They're just my sons. They came in a different way, but there they are. But anyway, he's had an interesting journey this past summer and through the fall and winter. And now in spring, he's out of his rehab. He's living on his own. He's got a job.
Great.
But there was many times during that when I'm like, well, how do I deal with this? Or again, what did I do wrong as a father that, we always want to blame ourselves, right?
I know, yeah.
But that love was the same thing that came through. Love him unconditionally. Let him walk his journey. Let him make his choices. But hold him always in love and in his magnificence.
Yeah.
And now he's a sponsor. He's doing great.
That's good for him.
He's doing great.
That's great.
But we all have our journeys. We all have those gut-wrenching, soul-stretching experiences, but it makes us who we are. I keep telling my son, you are the man you are because of what you've experienced, not in spite of it. It's in those divine arms, I was shown that we're all walking a perfect divine path. They look different,
right?
And we love to judge each other about
Sure.
But there is no judgment in my experience. It's the perfect path for the stretching of your soul. And maybe my son, we had some contract way back when he said, I'll do this. I'll show up this way to stretch your soul and teach you what unconditional love is. And then you say, oh, wow, yes, there's divine order in all of it. There's nothing to forgive.
Right.
It's all in divine order, right?
Wow. That's amazing. I want to ask you, obviously you're a faithful man, you're religious, you're a member of your church, and having this experience, did it just confirm more? Did it strengthen your testimony? Did it... I know that might sound like a dumb question, but I'm just curious, did it really kind of go, wow, it really put all that into perspective?
Todd, these questions are profound. It turned what I thought I believed inside out and upside down. I had grown up believing life was a test and God was going to judge me, and I was probably failing, and there's no way I would ever measure up. In those divine arms, what I learned is life is not a test. It's an absolute gift. Every moment is an absolute beloved divine gift, even the hard things.
Wow.
Or the things that I judge as hard. I also learned that we're all divine, that there is no us and them. There is no, they're bad, they're good. There was such universal compassion and unconditional love that it shifted everything. I tease with people and say, I'm no longer religious. I've become spiritual. I no longer have a religion beyond love. No, yes, I'm a member of a church. I attend. Religion is an interesting thing. If it's bringing us closer to the divine, great. If it's bringing us closer to each other, fantastic.
Wow.
But if it's separating, if it's causing me to feel not good enough, or if it's causing me to judge my neighbor, or if it's causing me to not love myself, that great command, love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
I was really good at loving the neighbors, but boy, that self-love thing took a little bit, you know. And religion can be a beautiful path to spirituality, to oneness, to beauty. I've found my own vibe that works really well for me.
Yeah.
But I've also learned somebody else might have a completely different vibe.
Right.
And that's okay.
And that's
I can embrace and love that too, because that's their path. I'm on my path. And let's walk together, even if we're walking in completely different ways, right?
Yeah. Wow. Love it. I saw you wearing a shirt in one of your photos that said, "Just be love."
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and it almost sounds, a little corny or cliche, but it really comes down to that, right? I mean,
yeah.
Like I'm feeling it right now with you, Jeff, honestly, like love.
Love is the answer, and love will win. We did those shirts. This was in the middle of the pandemic and all the rioting and all the things that were going on. And, everybody had a picket sign, for a political party, a race, this, a that. And I love our diversity. I love that we have all these different choices and that we're all these different cultures and colors and belief systems. And it was a dear friend of mine that inspired that. I was simply a participant, but we put on shirts that said, "Just be love." We picketed for love. We're like, look, let's forget all the difference.
That's awesome.
And be love. I mean, and here again, I often refer to who I call the great master, Jesus.
Yeah.
He sat on the Sermon on the Mount, I still read my Bible. And he said, "Be ye therefore perfect." Be that. Not become it. He never said become it. Be that. Embrace the perfection you are. Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow.
Yeah.
They don't spin and toil. And, as we contemplated, there's all this spinning and toiling in the world.
Right.
And those flowers just point up and say, hey, look at the light and embrace the divinity you are. Some flowers are this color, some flowers are that color, some have X amount of petals and grow differently.
Right.
But let's embrace the perfection we are. So we said be love. We didn't say become love. We said be it. Be that.
Yeah.
And that ripples out and
for sure
and creates that. But it's funny you saw that picture. I posted that on social media. But I'm glad you caught on to it. That's good.
No, it really hit me hard because look at my door there. It says "Just be it."
I saw it. Yeah.
And so when I'm sitting with a client, because my clients are sitting right where you're sitting, who have, we're trying to teach them to be honest and to have integrity and to be accountable and to help people. And it's like, we can talk about it. It sounds good, right? And everyone's like, yeah. And I'm like, then go be it.
Be it.
Walk out of this door and go be those things.
Hmm.
And as you be it, you're going to experience it. And that's why that really stood out to me, Jeff, when I saw you wearing that shirt.
Just be love. Well, I love that. In fact, it's interesting. My oldest son, Spencer, who's a grown man now, he's 30 years old, married, and amazing. He never had a near-death experience. He never had a spiritual experience in this. I mean, he speaks of one dream he had, and yet at the time he had the dream, he was about 15 years old, and his mother came and shared how much she loved him. And he woke up angry because it was a dream, because it wasn't real.
Right.
So he went through this whole scenario where,
I can imagine.
I mean, we came to a place, and we're very, very close, but he said, "Dad, I didn't have any of that. I prayed for 12 years as a little boy. I just want to feel Mom, and I got nothing." So he says, "You speak of this greater power. You speak of this divine." He said, "That let me down, and yet as he grew into manhood, this is what he said. He said, "You know what? I will be God's love. I'll be God's light." If I couldn't connect with that as a child or a young man, he said, I can be that. I can literally be God's hands here. I can be God's love. I can go serve others. I can go be it instead of praying for it. I'll just be it. And I thought, wow, I think he's an older, wiser soul that chose to be my son, to walk through this
for sure
whole scenario to teach me.
Wow, that's awesome.
He had friends in recovery. He had a friend that was, he was actually going to jail. There was drug charges and on and on and on.
Yeah.
and this is anecdotal, but he's like, Dad, I'm going to go with my buddy. He's having a hearing today in court, and I'm going to stand with him. And I'm like, no, you're not. You're not going to associate with a known drug dealer. I'm
right.
All these judgments, right? And Spencer said, "Is that what you do, Dad? You turn your back on somebody when they mess up? Is that what you've taught me?" And I was like, oh.
Boy, I bet that hit hard.
I'm like, oh, wow. He says, I'm going to be there. I'm going to stand with him. Because I might be the only guy that can say, I love you. In spite of anything. I love you because of it all. I love you. You're standing here and we're going to get through this together. And I was like, wow. When the teacher's ready, the master will appear.
Right.
And once again, it was my little boy who was now all grown up. But
wow.
But yeah, he maybe I'll get him that sign. Just be it, because he is just being it.
Yeah.
He is.
No, that's amazing. Thanks for sharing that part of it, and I'm glad to hear he's doing good.
Oh, he's great. He's incredible. He works with young people. He's a musician. He's always been a musician, and
right on.
He's
That's
playing
amazing.
in a band all the time, and he's just an incredible. He's the most compassionate, loving man I know.
Yeah.
And he does it naturally. I work at it, and he is that. He just is that. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I would imagine now that here we are this many years later, you've shared, you've written a book, you speak all over the world. Do you look back now and go, man, I see how this all just kind of fell into place like it should have?
Yeah, I do. I mean, there's days I think, gosh, why did I write that book? I just want to go have a weekend.
Right? Can you guys just leave me alone?
No,
I don't want to be on another podcast.
No, I mean it is an honor and a privilege, but
sure.
But yes, I see the divine order in all of it.
Okay.
In hindsight, I say, wow, had that not happened, had that not happened, and my only intention is that, gosh, can I just still be open? Just be open to what's next. Just be open to how I can serve another, because that's where the joy is.
Yeah.
When I shake my head and say, why did I do this? I have to remember it has nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
I did this because share your experience and others will heal.
Wow. I love that.
And that's what I keep coming back to. It's like, okay, that's what this is about. It's not about me. So yeah, we'll show up and we'll do our thing. And if it helps somebody, if it helps one person, then that's completely worth it.
Well, that rolls into my next question is, if there's one person right now hearing your story on this Belief Cast today who's struggling, who is just in a dark spot right now or a dark place in their life, what could you tell them? I know you've shared some amazing things already, but what would you say to that one person?
Wow. Two things. There is nothing you've done or nothing that's been done to you that changes the fact that you are divine. You're a divine, eternal being. You are literally in the image of God. Doesn't matter what you did. That's not who you are.
Right.
Who you are is a divine being. And the other is that it's a choice. In one of the darkest nights of my soul, after the accident, after I got home, in those lonely times when I was still having those thoughts of, maybe I could just go back home, God spoke to me again. It sounds like God speaks to me a lot, but he doesn't. He speaks to me when I'm listening, I suppose.
You're right.
But I was told two things. I was told to choose joy. 2 words, choose joy. Reminding me it's a choice, and I'm in control. I'm the creator.
Yeah.
And if I can just choose joy, I'll get to the next thing, which might be 10 minutes. I've worked with a lot of folks, suicide and other things. They say it's about an 8-minute scenario, that their mind could change in a matter of 6 to 8 minutes. So if someone's struggling, hold on to the next minute, remember you're loved, choose joy, choose peace. It will come. The sun will come up tomorrow, and it'll be a whole new choice, a whole new day. And that's what used to get me through.
Wow, that's great. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Choose joy, and that we're divine. Man, I'm telling you, this has been so wonderful. I could sit and talk to you for hours today. Thank you
Oh, you're welcome.
For sharing,
Thank you.
Jeff.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. If someone wants to reach out to you, or maybe to get your book or ask you a question or find out more about what you do, what's the best place for them to go to?
More than happy to do that. The book, Knowing. And Knowing's the one you want. That's the compilation of
all
everything.
of it.
So
Okay.
Knowing is available on Amazon.
Okay.
Knowing by Jeffery Olsen. And Jeffrey's spelled Jeffrey. They can email me. I answer my own email. It's Jeffrey, Jeffery, C, Olsen, Olsen, @gmail.com.
Okay.
They can also go to the webpage, which is Envoy Publishing, ENVOY. Envoy is French for messenger.
Okay.
Not that I'm the messenger, but
Right.
that thing I call spirit,
Yeah.
that whisper is the messenger. But Envoy Publishing also, you can look at videos there. I'm on social media. Just look under Jeffrey C. Olsen and you'll find me.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing that. And again, thank you for being willing to come share. I know these are sacred moments that I can see why you probably waited a long time anyways, because they're sacred. And I just want you to know I appreciate that you'd be willing to come on here and share some of those sacred moments with us today. And
I'm honored. And they are sacred. That,
for sure.
I honor them that way, and I trust that everyone else does too. But
awesome. Yeah. Well, there you go, guys. Thank you for joining us today and listening in once again. Reach out to Jeff and let him know what you think. Ask him a question. Check out his book, Knowing, on Amazon. Go get that book and share it with someone that you might know that's struggling. Because what I love about the story is it's not just about a near-death experience and you can only relate that way. It relates with all of us because we all are going through something.
Right.
And I think that's what was so beautiful about today, And I feel different by just sitting here listening to you, and I needed this today, honestly, personally. So thank you on so many levels.
I'm changed too, my friend. It goes both ways.
Yeah.
We edify each other always.
For sure. Well, there you go, guys. I love you. Thanks for tuning in. Again, thanks to our sponsor, Veracity Networks. I love you for believing in me. It means so much to me. And again, till next time, and I love all of you. Take care.